Murph, we've had a long year so far. I think it's time to bring back an old favorite. We need the gang back together. We got Aesir back.
Hello. You got me back.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Literally, I saw the BioShock 2 video. I was like, I should message that guy again. And I did. I am so glad I did. How have you been?
That's been really good, man. You know, I probably wouldn't have made the BioShock 2 video if we hadn't recorded about it, because I'd had a lot of these fleeting ideas, but a lot of the conversation we had actually helped focus me to actually sort of get my ass back into gear and make the video like 12 months later.
Oh, that's good. That's sick. And you've also been expanding your general purview of your videos. I highly recommend watching the videos, especially the Armored Core stuff. I've been like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I fell into the Armored Core hole. And people in the comments were generally really nice, and some people were like, "Are you gonna do like all of the games?" And I was like, "I'll do some of the games." But there's like 25 games, and I only did like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I did 8 of the games.
That's a lot. I also greatly enjoy. You did an interview with Lilith Walther, the Bloodborne PSX Nightmare Cart thing. That's awesome. Yeah.
That was super cool. I'm so happy that that I was able to arrange that, because I love doing interviews with developers. When I talked to Chris Avalon, and I actually recorded with Lunasit creator Akuma Kira. But that conversation, I just couldn't release it. There was the audio files were just too messy, too much background noise and such. But we still have something like planned to do together. I love doing it, recording with developers. I'm just really bad at doing it.
No, I get it, and I think some of the best stuff. One of the reasons why I like your analysis is because, first of all, you have made your own indie game with Snail. Did the remaster ever come out?
I'm still working on it. My life got really, so it probably would have come out this December. But for the past few months, and you can kind of see it on how much less footage, how many fewer videos I've been able to release. My life just got really busy for a few months there, but it's sort of all coming together again, and I have a few videos scripted that I'm currently I'm actually, like, literally right now I'm rendering snippets, because I'm using so much footage that I can't actually store it all in my laptop at the same time for rendering. So I'm just like clipping out little pieces. I'm rendering little clips to use in the videos, just like reoccurring themes of From Software. I have 3 out of 5 scripted already.
Oh, there you go. You got like so many in the project, in the pipeline at all times. Whenever I see your community feed or your Patreon stuff, it's like, this is in the pipeline. Silent Hill 4 happening sometime. I'm like, okay. Right.
Oh yeah, I have like 2 hours, 2 out of 4 hours of the Silent Hill 4 commentary. Oh my god, I just dropped like a bottle cap. I'm making so much background noise. How unprofessional.
That's all good.
No, but I have the half of the Silent Hill 4 commentary of the first draft is scripted, but it just kind of hit a wall. So I'm gonna leave it until after the reoccurring themes of FromSoft series. And we were talking about the Snail remaster. I am still working on that, but like I said, it would have come out this December, but probably like summer next year. I would imagine is more likely now. Themes of FromSoft, get back into Snail, release the demo. And then it's all happening again. Life got untangled. It's beautiful.
Well, it all happened before, and it shall all happen again.
I was also gonna plug one of my favorite things, again, with your analysis. It's very informed in like meat and potatoes of game design. probably with the indie experience. And also, like, I like watching your GDC, like whenever you watch a GDC talk, like one with Breath of the Wild, those are very good building block reactions, and those are, I highly recommend anyone watch those. But anyways, Aesir, have you played Shadow of the Erdtree?
Okay, so here's the deal.
Just to clarify, we're talking about Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree.
Oh yeah,
because there's so many others.
This isn't those other Shadow of the Erdtrees. So I played it. I couldn't beat Consort Radahn, and then I was like, but I need to record a lot of footage for my Themes of FromSoft video. I'll need to record the entirety of Elden Ring. So why don't I just record the Elden Ring commentary, and I'll do the DLC also. So I was like, well, I gotta do it again, and I replayed it, second build, and I was like, I probably spent 10 hours, but I finally did it. I beat Consort Radahn. It was the ugliest victory you can imagine. And then I was like, great. But that was just the test run. Now I need to actually record it, because I can't afford for any NPC script not to be perfect. Like, it has to be, I have to map it out precisely, because if anything misaligns, I can't fix it after I've started recording. It can't be done, and I'm not replaying it, so it had to be perfect. I had to test it out first. And so I replayed it. I bought a PlayStation 5 to get those extra frames, because I wanted the Elden Ring commentary in 60 FPS.
And then they announced the PS5 Pro, and now you need even more frames.
You're surely going to shell out so much money for that very valuable product, right, Aesir?
Yeah, of course. But then they also announced the September 11th nerf. And now Consort Radahn, they fixed so many problems.
I was going to say, I don't know if we were going to jump immediately into it. I don't think the difficulty was that bad at all until Radahn. I think Radahn needed fixing. I think that's... Yeah. Because it's like, it's not even like, oh, the final boss is hard. Like, yes, that happens. But it's like the ways. It's like the damage. Even with the Scadutree fragments, all of that stuff, it doesn't matter. It was frustrating. It wasn't a satisfying difficulty.
Yeah, and it was a lot of like, so the waterfowl dance. The thing about the waterfowl dance is that if you just have light armor, Millennia's waterfowl dance, if you just drop your armor weight to light armor, you're actually fast enough that you can just roll out of its range when it starts. So like every single build can realistically at least dodge it. Like I think it's still a really crappy attack that she does, but you know, there is cheese that everybody can apply. Radahn has he had 3 of those. Whereas like once the cross slash attack thing happens, you have to dodge it frame perfect, or else he's just gonna hit you with at least one of them. And it's just like, oh, that kind of sucks. And it then he had those attacks, like phase 2, a lot of the attacks really felt unintuitive. Like, it's really difficult to read where like the light attacks would come the first few times. You sort of have to understand that, like, no, they follow the arc of his sword swing, so you need to roll along with that. And there's a lot of trial and error to beating him, which I really think is just the worst for these bosses.
But in general, I did really like the DLC.
Oh, yes.
Murph, did you end up beating the DLC? I'm really curious.
I mean, I've been waiting to say that I didn't have a hard time with Consort Radahn at all.
Oh my god.
Okay. All right.
Here comes the try hard.
It was like
different.
It was like 5 tries, right?
What?
All right. Okay. All right, buddy.
This guy.
But overall, I'm just like, it took me a moment to even think, like, did I actually beat Radahn? No, I did do that, and I think that's kind of my issue with the DLC, is that I just don't, a lot of it washed over me, and I'm actually struggling to remember a lot of the bosses and dungeons of it.
I think what I liked most about the DLC was, I think Elden Ring coming out was like, oh yeah, this is great, this is awesome. I was a little nervous about like how FromSoft approached open world and open field design in a way. I was like, there's some kinks that needed worked out. I think Shadow of the Erdtree solved a lot of problems and fixed a lot of things. Like, for instance, the reward systems and all of that, like, is a lot more satisfying. I remember a lot of the overworld stuff of Shadow of the Erdtree. And then, like, the interconnected design of the Mesmer's dungeon was really, really solid. I agree that there's definitely some bits that, like, blur together, but that's also because of the content. There's, like, so much fucking content to that expansion that it just does that otherwise. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love the Shadow Tree fragments as a form of resetting progression for the DLC. I think that's a very clever and elegant way to do that, especially for people that have been like New Game Plus 7, waiting for this DLC to drop so they can just bulldoze through it, giving them a hard reset. That's very clever. And I like the layering of the level. A lot of people pointed out that, like, oftentimes you'll see an area below you and an area above you to progress. I just don't think a lot of those areas are actually that interesting, and I think it comes down to the base game kind of already covered all of its bases, so the DLC just kind of feels iterative, rather than, like, a FromSoft DLC that really pulls out new environments. Like, all the DLC locations for Dark Souls 2 are very distinct and separate from what's in the base game. And I feel that's true also for, like, the Bloodborne DLC or the Dark Souls 3 DLCs. I just don't feel that with this.
They just gave a mini Elden Ring 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how much that might just be because of the constraints of being like an open world game, because you can't really distinguish riding around on Torrent through areas that much.
Yeah.
But it's also very much FromSoft, just, hey, here's the DLC. So all of these concepts that were really half-baked in the base game, we'll just do that again. So, like, the fishing hamlet, that's just Canehurst. They just did Canehurst again, where you have, it's Bergenworth that goes into the fishing hamlet to steal a Great One Child. But in Canehurst, it's the executioners of the Healing Church that go into Canehurst to steal a Great One Child. And in Elden Ring, you have, like, the Horn Scent, and that's kind of like not Rao. Rao is also in the DLC. What are the underground antler boys from the base
like
game?
The Mole Men?
They worship, like, the ancestral spirits. It's like, here's the
deer.
That.
Civilization.
In the base game.
Yeah. So, like, here's, like, the civilization that preceded us, and, you can sort of walk around in their ruins. But now we're like, okay, this is the civilizations that preceded the one that's here, like, immediately preceded it. So it's like, it's a very FromSoft DLC. What I really like about it is that I feel all of the lessons I feel like Elden Ring should have taught them. I felt they were I felt them in there. So
100%.
one of my nitpicks with base game Elden Ring, this is like a real nitpick, it's just there's a lot of wankers on the world who's just like, you're riding and then you're like hit with a crossbow arrow from some jackass you can't even see, and it's like, what is this? And I feel that DLC was a lot more confident in just letting areas breathe. You don't need patrolling enemies everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
No, you just need giant, annoying fire kindle giant golems.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. But, like, no, you're right. It was way less worried about the every 30 seconds you need engagement sort of philosophy of open world design. I also like... I think Elden Ring base game was sort of where my breaking point for NPCs was. And I think NPCs in general were done way better in the DLC. A lot of them are concentrated in central areas where it's very clear, like, oh, yes, they're going to be here. There's still some complexity or hidden stuff to them, but it feels like it's very, like, clear when those moments are. And I really appreciate it, especially on a story perspective. You've got the goofy ones, like the guy screaming, "Bail!" And you've got, like, real, actual, tangible subplots that sort of make the base game better.
Did you guys feel... We're jumping around all over the place. When I beat Radon, I saw the cutscene, I felt like... Is there is there like, did they cut a piece of the story out? Because to me, like the reveal that Radon has sort of been revived in the body of Moog, that reveal feels like it should have been like a plot twist, and that you were like, and it's like it kind of is, but they're like they tell you earlier on if you follow like the Ansbach Freya stuff, but it feels like what they were going for was like, what if we have the player think Mikola is reviving Godwin, but then plot twist, no, it's Radon. But then it feels like Godwin is just not there, really. So it's just like, oh, it's Radon.
That's very bizarre. No, I totally agree. It's very understated how they present it. Because, yeah, in the Ansbach story, it feels very well presented. But then outside of it, you're like, because, like, Radon also doesn't really show any Moog physicality to him, other than, like, an extra move or two.
Yeah.
You should have been able to use the shackle on him.
And it's stuff that where it feels like that's appropriate. And it doesn't feel so appropriate.
He flies up and you use the shackle.
I think it like would have helped if like when I heard that, because this got spoiled immediately, like, oh, the final boss of the DLC is Radon, but it's Radon in Moog's body, and there's a really annoying phase 2. I thought the phase 2 was gonna be like, oh, like Moog starts fighting back for control, and they're like splitting between their movesets.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be way cooler than what we got. But that's fine.
I've seen a lot of really beautiful artwork on Twitter where it's just it's Radon and Mikola, but Radon like is a lot more Moog physicality. So he has like the horns, but they've just sort of been cleaved off, and he still has like Moog's body, but it's just sort of been, a bit malformed. But you can it's like it's really unpleasant, and I think it's a much better design.
It's so weird because FromSoft is usually so great at horror design, body horror, physical stuff, that like when you see Radon, it's like, oh, it's just Radon again. And you're like, oh, that's it.
He has some horns on his hands.
It almost feels like, because I was one of the people who, Radon is like one of the most memorable bosses of the base game, but also I found it a really annoying boss because they wanted to go for like a spectacle sort of gimmick boss, but then also the boss was very difficult, so you'd had to keep replaying the spectacle and gimmick, right? So it kind of felt like this was a what's the word I'm looking for? A consolation. Like, oh, here's fighting Radon in his prime with no gimmick,
Yeah.
As far as like this being a mini Elden Ring 2, I kind of wish this was more a post-game thing, because the implication is like the Shadow World is sort of some sort of like afterlife, right? Because that's where Moog and Radon and Mikola all wind up. And it would have been cool to see like, what about the other people you've killed? What if this is where you encountered the lingering shade of Gideon Ofnir or something like that.
And, well, like, also what Aesir said with the Godwin stuff, there's, like, a lot of Godwin setup, and, like, you still see his face in, like, some of the tombs, but it feels very, like, light. It's not really much of a thing. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's it.
I really get the sense that I feel like I should have been led to believe that I was gonna fight Godwin, or, like, I was gonna encounter him in some capacity.
I didn't even get all the setup for Radon being the final boss, let alone that it was Radon in Moog's body. Like the factor that you had to go and do like an NPC quest line to learn that, it really feels like this stretched my limits of credulity for FromSoft storytelling, where it's like, no, this makes sense if you really delve into the lore and do everything. But I don't think a final boss should be that.
I think there's a way to have your cake and eat it, too, on that. I think if they redid the design, you would have been happy on the face of it. But I do feel like the NPCs weaving together with the story helps. Like, I like Ansbach's story. There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
I think that was very
I like the
satisfying.
NPCs in the DLC. It's very reminiscent of Dark Souls 2, which I praised its NPC storytelling for, because it feels like you are just one person on this collective quest going on. You're just the one that happened to make it through.
Yeah.
I do want to say also, Murph, I disagree only because I want to cite my favorite area, the fucking woods with Midra's Manse in it. That's a baller area. I love it. 10 out of 10.
that was a great area, and I like the boss for it, and I like the Resident Evil Mansion, like, dungeon. That was, like, one of... If I look back on this DLC, that whole section is going to be the most memorable part to me.
I think, just on stretching the credulity of FromSoft storytelling, I think hiding, or not even hiding, I think having the Moog Radon revelation happen in an NPC quest, I think it's forgivable because it's a DLC. I think that if this was the base game, it would be like, oh, okay, so I gotta replay it again in order to get it because I missed this here interaction in your...
But I think something equivalent would be like in the old Hunters DLC, that Lady Maria is the pale doll. That's something you can understand on sight. It's not like Maria looks true. Wildly different, and then you like do an NPC quest line. It's like, by the way, Gurman turned Maria into a doll. I wonder what became of that doll, and then it clicks for you.
But then again, I think there are still some good lore bombs. I can't believe we're talking lore on this cast. I was hesitating away from it. I think the America stuff with the small village that's in the hidden area or whatever, I think that's so effective. It's a very memorable, peaceful area. And it sort of lets the player figure it out for themselves. Stuff like that I really love. Or like the fucking Placidusax reveal with Bale. Like, oh, Bale was the fucking reason he's losing heads. Like, that shit's fun. I think that works. But maybe it works because it's all on the sides and not necessarily what you're building towards in the DLC.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like this DLC was made to wrap up loose ends. Because I don't think they're going to do an Elden Ring 2, really.
We'll see.
Ooh,
we'll see, Murph. We'll see.
There's a lot of money to be made in Elden Ring 2. I wouldn't be opposed to an Elden Ring 2. Like, even if they just did a Grand Theft Auto thing where it's like, we'll do one Elden Ring every generation, and it'll make $10 billion, and that'll just finance all of our other weird projects. I'd be fine with that. I'm not, like, clamoring for an Elden Ring 2. I don't need an Elden Ring 2. But I think this is a license that really lends itself to sequels, because the problem Dark Souls always had was that, you know, it's the transition from fire to darkness, and you can only like stretch the transition so long until you're just repeating yourself. And like Dark Souls 2 tried to take the series in an interesting new direction, but then by Dark Souls 3 it's like, again, it's like, okay, you have the Age of Fire and it's stagnant, and you have the Age of Dark that's like just on the horizon, and at a certain point, you either just tip over or you're just like, and again, you're just rekindling the fire. But Elden Ring, it's just, the sort of metaphysical governing principle of the world can be whatever. It just can't be the thing that's ruling it right now because it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I think that's the big thing is like Dark Souls, especially by 3, Murph, you have played 3. 3's very cynical. Like, if there's a thematic message to 3 in a sentence, it's please don't make me make a Dark Souls 4. That's like, that's what it is, right? And like, Elden Ring, I think, is built as a franchise. Like, I think there's like an anime adaptation coming out or something, right? Like, I think they want to make this a franchise in some sense, and I think it is built for longevity in a different way that makes it more, even in like the repetition of like, oh, this repeats over and over again. It transforms and is indicative of history. History repeats itself, but it's not necessarily like, oh, we're all fucked.
Yeah, I think I would just need a really good pitch for what Elden Ring 2 is beyond it being more Elden Ring and more FromSoft boss design and whatnot, because I think this really was like my breaking point with FromSoft combat, because I was really looking forward to this, because we did like that Dark Souls 2 episode, and that made me like, oh, I want to boot up Elden Ring again, do a different build, maybe like some sort of like whip build or something, and then playing Shadow of the Erdtree, I was like, God damn it, why does it take 17 years for my character to get up after getting knocked down? The boss is just gonna okie me for the rest of my health bar. Fuck this boar. Why are they calling it a hippo?
He's a rhino also.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with that. I also think that an Elden Ring 2, one of the fears I kind of have for it is that Elden Ring, it takes all of these distant thematic ideas that FromSoft has had over the years, like burning blood. That's like blood really appeared in Bloodborne, and in the Bloodborne DLC we have this idea of burning blood with Lawrence, and that sort of reappears in Dark Souls 3 in another way. And by Elden Ring, it's like, okay, let's actually look at that. And like it's actually in Sekiro, because Sekiro has like this idea of
like the parasites, the dragon blood.
Yeah, the dragon blood actually. But there's this specifically. I can't remember because they don't say the word in Sekiro, but there was this belief in ancient Japan that illnesses are caused by little bugs that live in your blood, and you can actually
and this gets brought up by Not Solaire in Bloodborne, the League.
Yeah, Alfred. But yeah, so like the idea of blood and how the sort of thematic exploration of blood, like cultural resonances of blood and whatever, like they distill that in the character of Moog. And then they have like enlightenment. Now enlightenment, you go back to Demon Souls, you have like the moongrass system, and it's like the different cycles of grass and what they do for you. And in Dark Souls you have like, well, you have Seath and you have like the Moonlight Greatsword, and it's like It reappears in all of these games, the idea of enlightenment, and then they just go, okay, that's Rani, that's her faction. And then you have, like, madness, that's this faction. And then you have, like, strength, the just idea of gaining strength. Don't worry about philosophy, just gain strength. Don't think about what you're doing, just hunt beasts, seek power, seek less. It's just, and then you get that into Radahn. It's all of these ideas FromSoft has had over the years, repurposed into Elden Ring, into these different gods. And if I have one major complaint of the DLC, it didn't add... I love Mikola. I think that's a really interesting new idea. Aside from that, it's a bunch of things we already saw in the base game. So you have, like, a god of madness. You have a crazy dragon god. You have, like, the Rao ruins. And that's just... It's like... All of this was in the base game, except for Mikola. I really love this idea of... He's dangerous... because he's a child and he doesn't know any better. As like he's genuinely just super naive and he doesn't know what he's doing, and that makes it.
He's
but
old
he's
enough to have a consort.
Well, I mean, I also like the Saint Trina stuff and like the other half things, and like I love how they did Mikola in this as a god of love, but it's sort of like a forced love. It really puts into perspective what else has like it puts in perspective the America parallels and all of that. But you're right, Aesir, especially with like take Mesmer. Right? Mesmer's like the fucking poster boy for the DLC. He looks cool. Actually, he's probably my favorite design visually. But like, it's fire and a snake. How many times have you fucking seen that? It's a lot.
Elden Ring. Elden Ring, there was fire and a snake.
Yeah. It's fucking...
He talked like Elmer Fudd.
Yeah. I mean, it's in the nature of FromSoft to be iterative, and with the ambition of Elden Ring, it's like, yeah, we're gonna fucking have everything in there. But, like, you're right, Aesir. Is like, they could have done something here. It usually just feels like tying up loose ends rather than introducing new stuff.
Yeah. And that's what worries me about an Elden Ring 2, is that if you're gonna do it, give it a few years. Give yourselves times to get interested in new ideas. Like, do another mech game and just start exploring some weird different ideas there. Do, like, a survival horror game. Do another Kuon. Start exploring some new ideas. Don't just do Kegare and all this stuff again. Like, it's fine if you bring that stuff over, but you need to do new things, too.
Yeah.
Armored
Core, I would highly recommend to any listener out there. What we needed that, but yes.
Yeah, Elden Ring is a really compromised game. I think it's a masterpiece, but it's really compromised in that, in order to make it, you sort of have to just repackage a lot of old content. So ideas from previous games, characters from previous games, even like the combat like the gameplay mechanics themselves. This isn't really the best. Like if you were building Elden Ring from scratch, it's not obvious to me that you would go, oh, it should have combat like Dark Souls. Because the level design, I don't think really lends itself. Like, I don't think this is the best utility of levels. I think it's better in the Shadow of the Erdtree because they have. I think this just have better dungeon designs. But like, in order to actually make it, you need to reuse the combat system because you have AI and you have like enemy designs that you can sort of repackage and bring that over, and then that saves you years of development. You can reuse these characters in this story because it saves you so much time. that's sort of the compromise at the heart of Elden Ring. But I can accept that for Elden Ring. I'm not super enthused about that again for Elden Ring 2. So new ideas, please.
We'll see what they do. I'm curious.
Speaking of new ideas, let's talk about old ideas.
Let's talk about an old game. Speaking of reuse, I played the Castlevania collection, the Dominus collection. I love this. First of all, M2 is a really great developer of remakes and collections and all that, and they've been doing the Konami stuff for a while. I have two real takes, because I've played all of them, but like for the collection release, I've only played two, which is Order of Ecclesia and the fucking Haunted Castle remake. So I'm gonna start with the Haunted Castle remake. Guys, they made Haunted Castle good. That's crazy.
What is Haunted Castle for someone that only plays Castlevania games as episodes for this podcast?
Imagine
what is Haunted Castle for somebody who only played the first episode of Castlevania?
Okay, you know how there's like 50 versions of Castlevania 1?
I thought you were going to say I thought you were going to say, so you know what a castle is.
Yes, it's the Vania version. No, it's an arcade version of Castlevania 1. Very different though in terms of level design and enemies, because I think it was released near the same time. Same with Vampire Killer. Vampire Killer is a PC version that's a lot more based on... Vampire Killer is like an adventure game kind of, where you're looking for keys to enter doors. Haunted Castle is much more of an arcade Ghosts and Goblins type thing, where it's like, no, we want you to die right now, so you can put another quarter in. So it's unfair, and it's very stiff and unsatisfying to play. They include the original version in this collection, but M2 has completely remade the game. They took the core concepts of like enemy design, level design, and visually it can be a little bit of a mess, but in a sort of HD Castlevania Rebirth way, they remade the game, and it is super playable, super fresh. It's a short game, so I would still highly recommend it. I will play it a bunch. It's great, and the soundtrack's good, so that's all you need to know.
Awesome.
And then what I learned this time around with Order of Ecclesia, Murph, last episode we did a Super Metroid episode with Brian Barnett. He talked a lot of shit about Castlevania.
Yes. It's undeserving to be the Vania of Metroidvania.
That was his claim. And I'm just gonna say, I disagree, dear viewer. Order of Ecclesia, however, is slightly not a Metroidvania in genre. It is a little bit, but by that point, the developers were like, we've sort of mastered it. Like with Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow, they figured out how to fucking make these games. So with Portrait of Ruin and Order of Ecclesia, they started getting experimental with it, and I really love both of these games. Portrait of Ruin has lacking level design because they segment it, but then they have John and Charlotte, and switching the characters on the fly or having them together at once makes the game really dynamic and fun. And then Order of Ecclesia does the segmented levels, but they do it in a much smarter and more focused way. And especially with Shanalot's like spells and movement, it feels really, really fun. I love these games. That's all I got to say. That's it.
Can I ask this? So these are mostly ports, or I guess remakes of DS games. How have they managed to bridge the gap of having only one screen for these re-releases?
They have multiple versions of like the HUD where you can see different screens of like you can see the map, and then you can see a thing, and then the main screen is what you see. The touch part is optional with the touchpad. Dawn of Sorrow actually requires you in the original game to like draw shit to like open doors. They shortened that to button shortcuts to where it's like, oh, you press X squared triangle and you're good.
Okay.
So yeah, they streamline it, they make it easier. And it's actually really convenient, especially with the different layouts. You could just see the map at all times, so you know where you're going. I really like it. I think it works. I think they've pretty much figured out DS collection porting, in my opinion.
All right. Speaking of remakes of beloved childhood classics,
Murph, I always hear you fucking talk about this game. Age of Mythology Retold. What's the deal?
All right, so laying it all out on the table. Age of Mythology is my third favorite game of all time. I don't often bring up my favorite games of all time in any sort of definitive list. I know that Age of Mythology is going to be 3 regardless. Okay. All right. This is a spin-off of the Age of Empires series. Age of Empires dealing with sort of medieval RTS combat. Age of Mythology is let's do Bronze Age, but you have magic powers, and things like Cyclopses and Minotaurs are units you can recruit. And for a long time, the game sort of languished in, I think it came out, early 2000s, and it was always seen, not necessarily as a black sheep, but as a spin-off. And therefore, when Forgotten Empires came along and they were we're going to release an HD version of Age of Empires 2, because that's the baby. That's the melee of the franchise. Everyone loves it.
Sure.
For the competitive scene.
Is there a competitive scene to these games?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Red Bull sponsors the shit out of AoE 2 tournaments, and it's really, really, really popular in Eastern Europe.
You'll learn something new every day. Continue.
And so it was they're remastering the famous one.
Brutally interject to say that all of the Eastern Europeans I know drink just an ungodly amount of caffeine, so I can believe that it's big in Eastern Europe if Red Bull is behind it.
Yeah. And so Age of Mythology, I'll get into it, that I'm not good at RTSs, and I never was as a child, but I liked the theming, and I especially liked the campaign mode of it. And so when Forgotten Empires was hey, by the way, we're doing a definitive version of AoE 2, it was okay, that's expected. And then they were and we're doing a remake of AoE 3. That's when I was well, hold on. No one likes AoE 3. Not even, it's pretty, but it's not a good game. So what the hell's going on here? And then they were and we're doing 3 different DLC expansions for all these games that are now 20 years old. And that's when you're thinking, when I, the Age of Mythology fan, am but what if they do that, but for the game in the series I like? Okay. And then finally, they were and we're doing a definitive version of Age of Mythology. And that's what this is. This is a glowed up version of that game, completely rebalanced, and tweaking a lot of the units and civilizations within it. The big gimmick of Age of Mythology is that you have 4 different mythological civilizations. You have the Greeks, the Norse, the Egyptians, and then in a DLC they added the Atlanteans, which is just bonus Greeks. But the thing is that all 4 of those play completely differently. The Norse, my favorite faction, their civilians don't build buildings. They can only gather resources. Their military, their human units build buildings. And so they're a very rush-oriented faction where you're kind of setting up military bases outside your opponent's settlement and just sending in constant units. Whereas the Egyptians, they don't, a lot of their buildings don't cost resources at all, but they take forever to build. And they sort of gather favor in a very unique way. And within each of those factions, there are 3 major gods that tweak them further. For the Greeks, it's Zeus, Hades, Poseidon. And Poseidon's very cavalry and naval focused, and etc., etc. And then each time you age up, you choose between 2 minor gods within that sort of skill tree. And so it's a lot of player expression, and the civilizations can get very unique and different from each other. And that's what really appealed to me as a child, is that everything was visually different. All the civilizations had different units, different progression systems, different economies. And then you have the campaign, which is just a series of really good-ass RTS missions. And not all of them are just build up a base and attack your enemy type missions. There's a lot where you don't have a base at all, and you're just trying to manage a starting army you have to complete objectives around a map. One of my favorite missions is reduxing Xerxes Island from the Odyssey, where all your units are turned into pigs, and you have to go around freeing other pigs from farms, and then finding a way to turn back into human units so that you can wage war on Circe. It's a lot of fun.
That sounds great. Let me ask you, I have a real question here. You said they rebalanced the game. Do you want that in a remake?
So it's a thing of like I said, I was never good at the game. I never even really thought of like, oh, like for some reason as a kid, I was like, the AI cheats because they put more than two units to harvest gold and wood, you know? Whereas you're supposed to just spam villagers and gatherers to get it. I use cheat codes, and the game has a lot of fun cheat codes. You can summon a Canadian superhero bear.
Wow. Okay, sure. But is it a good remake?
It is, I think, because what they did in rebalancing things is they sort of gave, they reduxed like what the Norse are. The Norse, like I said, my favorite faction, they gave them 2 different military buildings and also different military units and sort of increased the price so you couldn't zerg as easily. You needed to actually think about your decision making and what units you made. They've also added completely new major gods. This had day 1 DLC, but if you pre-ordered, you got it, where it adds a 4th major god for the Norse, which is Freyr, which adds in a bunch of new units and god powers and such. I didn't bring up god powers. Each time you level up, you get a new god power, which is just like a devastating thing. In the original game, you could only do it once. Like, if you're worshipping Zeus, you get a lightning storm that just wipes out enemy units in an area. In this remake, they make it so those are reusable at a cost of favor, and favor is what you use to hire myth units, which are exceptionally powerful units, often based on mythology. Like, it's an Anubis for Egyptians, or it's a Draugr for the Norse.
Well, last question. I vaguely saw on Twitter, of all places, that the Anubis thing was supposedly AI art. Does this use AI art?
So in pre-release, they were like, oh, here's the new art for all the major god portraits. And it really, really looked AI generated. Like one of the god portraits for the Egyptians had like 6 knuckles. The portrait for Apollo, he's like holding the bow wrong because he's pictured with a bow and arrow. And when they had an open beta a month before the game fully released, we saw all the god portraits and people were like, this doesn't look good. And also, you could play 6 missions of the campaign, and we learned that they completely recast the main cast. Now, for me, this was traumatic, as someone that loves the Age of Mythology campaign, and it's high melodrama bravado. And it's one of those circumstances where I'm not going to come out and say the new cast is bad, or maybe it's just different, you know, from what I've played 100 times. But in the month between the beta and the full release, they completely redid all the god portraits and like tagged the artists they went to redo the artists' portraits. And then they also redid all the voice lines of the campaign, bringing back one of the original actors who plays the main character, Arcantos. The other cast members are also recast, and the theory I've subscribed to as far as that is they've said outright, like, we want to do more expansions and also expand the campaign. And I think if they want to do that, they would need to reuse the characters from the campaign and therefore just have a stable of voice actors they already have, like, signed up, rather than needing to bring back older voice actors, some of which have tragically passed away since the original game released.
Didn't they do something similar for Baldur's Gate 2? When didn't somebody get their hands on that and then just start adding some expansions to the main story?
Yeah, Beamdog did, I think it was called, like, the Siege of Spear Tower or something like that.
Yeah,
which was meant to bridge Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2 a little cleaner. And also, just at launch, Age of Mythology Retold has, like, a built-in mod launcher, and the very first mod that went up puts back in all the original voice actors into the campaign, for if you want that. They did also sell a DLC that's all the original god portraits for like $5. I think that is pretty scummy.
Gotta make that money.
But otherwise, I am very satisfied with this remake as someone that just loves this game to pieces. And I would recommend it, and I'm living the high life right now when I see like the Microsoft Twitter doing everything they can to like promote this game. And the fact they keep teasing like, oh, and we're gonna do an expansion that adds a Chinese civilization, and then another expansion that adds a mystery civilization. Like, I feel like I'm 10 again, and I couldn't be happier.
You know what game you should not play when you're 10 years old? Let me tell you. Fear and Hunger Termina.
I can see this. I can understand this. Elaborate.
Aesir, have you played a Fear and Hunger game?
I think I know what games these are. I haven't played them though.
Yeah, Super Eye Patch Wolf made videos on them, on the original. They're like hardcore dungeon RPGs, but they're not so much focused on stats as they are like knowing how the game works.
It's a little more immersive sim survival horror than like a typical turn-based RPG.
Yeah, like basically every like stuff like knowing how combat works is like every limb has its own HP. So if you get rid of arms, you are more likely to survive the encounter because they don't take a machete to you immediately. And going for headshots is hard because they'll dodge it usually. Hitting torsos does the most, you could go straight for the torso, etc., etc. Anyways,
but then there's also like roundabout solutions. Like when I was watching you stream it, there's the guy with the gas mask, and you try. The way to beat him is to talk to him, and he tries to talk back, but you can't hear him through the mask. And you're like, what was that? And he like keeps repeating himself angrier, and eventually he takes off the mask, and he dies from his own gas he's expelling.
Yes. Stuff like that, where it's like just knowing how the game works is really it. Termina is fun because it's sort of... I always like looking at how sequels show developer changes, like where developers are strong, they get stronger in. So in the first game, there's like 4 playable characters, and they all play very different from each other, and they all have different backstories and stuff. They expand this into Termina. Termina is basically like, instead of a medieval fantasy, it's much more like it takes place in the pseudo World War II. It's not literally, but it basically is. And there's like a train wreck, or the train stops, and 13 contestants are trapped in this town for a battle royale, and they have 3 days to kill each other. And each character, I think there's like 8 playable characters right now, and each character plays fundamentally different, and each have different backstories and processes to them. And I really love how that works. And this could be also compared to like a Bloodborne or a Majora's Mask, where it's very, very time sensitive. You literally do have 3 days. If you sleep, which is how you save typically, time moves forward, which is a bad thing. So you're very conscious of risks you have to take. And you're very deliberate in party members, because most of the party members are your rivals. So stuff like that is very interesting. And I also love how dense the city itself is. It feels very complex. It feels like a dungeon, but in a very modern way. And like, for instance, a really good example of how well the characters are is like there's a character called Olivia, and Olivia is like wheelchair bound, and like I see all the time on Twitter about like how accurate representation is for a handicap people. Is like, oh, if you can make a story, why would you make a handicapped person? It's like, no, representation is really cool and important. And like Olivia is like a very clear way to have fair and difficult representation. Like, she can't climb stairs like with her wheelchair. So like that is a major...
So you actually have to like think around that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, typically the answer is to get off the wheelchair, but that means you have to crawl upstairs, which is not fun. Especially if you're trying to navigate or dodge things. But it also means that, like, for instance, if you're a typical character, if a monster attacks your leg and you break your leg, or your leg gets cut off, you can't run anymore. But Olivia doesn't care about that because she's in a wheelchair. So in that sense, it does compensate. Oh. So stuff like that is very interesting in an immersive sim sense, and it's really nice to see how the game pops in that way. I would highly recommend anyone check out Fear and Hunger Termina. It's been a lot of fun. It's kind of addicting to also see how all the interactions work, like the little cutscenes of like, oh, I have to be here on the morning of day 2 to see these two interact. But if I killed one of them a day ago, this would happen instead. Oh, that's really fun. I love it. Great game.
And the characters you don't play as are like then integrated in the story, right?
Yes. They all matter in the story. And I feel like the story, like, it's definitely like you could see the influences. It's very clear about like what games and what media this developer has played, but it's very like organic and it feels good. And it, as long as it's good, I never mind how derivative something is. So yeah, huge thumbs up.
All right. You know, in Fear and Hunger, they hear the voices of the moon.
All right, go ahead with the segue, Murph. Go ahead.
But in Voices of the Void, you can also hear the voice of the moon, actually.
What is this game? I know nothing about this game.
So this is a genre I'm going to coin as an isolation simulator.
Okay.
It is ostensibly it is a horror game, I'll say that. It's a horror game. It's one of those horror games where it's like, oh, you're employed at a new job and you do menial tasks and something creepy starts happening. Except this is good.
Okay.
This is pre-alpha. The version I'm playing is 0.8. And they're planning full release sometime 2025 when it's finished. The setup is you are a researcher sent to this remote SETI listening outpost. You know, the places with the big satellite dishes where they listen to space and use that to decode like exoplanets and space debris, yada yada. The center you've been sent to, you're the only person there because it's been abandoned for who knows how long. You show up in the middle of the night, you walk this really creepy path through the forest, and then you get there, and the place is just, like, filled with trash. And what your daily task is you have 4 terminals, one finds signals in space, one decodes it, one plays it back, and another one you can upgrade to refine the decoding a little better so you can hear the signal better. But those take time to process, especially at the start of the game. Like, just finding a signal in space, the satellite dishes then have to, like, turn to where that signal is, and that takes real time. So, you go out and you do other things. You can clean up your base, you can buy trash bags and a mop, and clean up the base. You have to manage hunger and stamina, but honestly, those are really easy to come by, especially since each day your bosses will drop off via drone an MRE for you, and that will generally cover your hunger for the day, but the more you eat of a same food, the less, like, return you get on it. But you also have to go out to the satellite dishes and fix them up if they shut down, and repair the servers, or your 3 transformers that power the whole thing may need a quick reboot to get them back up to power. So you're just kind of killing time a lot of time, and it gets you into this loop where you're like, okay, this is what this is, but then things do start to happen. You may be out doing like a little job at night and see just lights off in the forest. And these aren't scripted per se. As far as I understand, there are 150 potential events that could happen any point past the first day. And those range from, like I said, lights in the forest, or one time I looked up and saw jellyfish flying overhead. And I was like, huh, that's odd. Or you might just hear sounds in your base, clinking, clattering sounds. And it sort of just builds this real feeling of getting you in a headspace of like, what the fuck was that?
How long does a day take?
So that's where I'm kind of a little bit confused, because you have a calendar or an alarm clock that will tell you, like, oh, this is the time and the day. The thing is, I feel like the sun sets and rises at least twice before it moves on to a day, right? Huh. So I can't really say what the turnaround from, like, day to night is. If for anyone that's, like, hearing me say, like, oh, this is a horror game, I'll also add that, like,
the feeling is oppressive, but it's also just a goofy game in general. Like, when you get on low hunger, you start to hallucinate burgers are everywhere.
Oh,
And
that sounds fun.
and things like that. And I don't think there's really a fail state, or at the very least, it hasn't been implemented yet. Like, in the store, because as you decode signals and just do tasks, you'll get science credits, I think they're called, and you can use those at the company store to buy new machinery, upgrade your systems, buy posters to put up around the place, etc. And in that store, you can buy medicine, but right now, as I understand, there's not a health system implemented yet. There is a cancer system. You can smoke cigarettes, and that will build up your cancer meter, which is a secret. But otherwise, it's just kind of like fun simulator stuff. You can fish, you know. And as far as, like, building the sense of horror and unknown, I do have one little story I do want to share to sort of sell the game. Is very early on, it was like day 3, I found this very faint signal out in space, and I decoded it, and when you decode a signal, it comes with, like, a little picture of what it is, and in this, it was just, like, a triangle out in space. And I was like, well, that's probably something. I'll save it, and when I get up to, like, the full decoding level, it's like level 1, level 2, level 3. Once I get to level 3, let me decode that and see what it might be. And so I held on to this signal for a while, and then I get to level 3, and I decode it, and it's a strained voice saying, "We come in peace." And I was like, ruh-roh. And then I hear that same voice outside my little office saying, "Step outside."
Ooh.
Now, when events are happening in Voice of the Void, you can't pause the game. That's how you know something's going on. You can't pause, you can't go to sleep. So, and it's like, in-game, it's like midnight outside. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I can't leave this office for any reason whatsoever. I'm not stepping outside. I don't want to know what's happening.
That's fun.
And I just stay in the office, decoding signals. I got a lot of work done. The sun started coming up, and I was eventually like, I still can't pause. I guess I might as well step outside and see what's going on. Step out into the hall, nothing. Look around the base, nothing. Eventually, I do step outside the facility, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever it was, I must have missed the trigger for it, and it's passed. Except I still can't pause. And I'm like, well, maybe it's bugged out, maybe something's happening, and I just missed it, or I don't see it. And I'm like, all right, well, I've got the signals I decoded last night. I'm going to take them to the garage, because that's where the drone comes to pick up the signals you've decoded and send them off to your boss. And I'll just, like, keep playing. Step into the garage. A gray alien lunges at me while shrieking, and I immediately freeze up. I'm flailing my limbs in different directions to both protect my vital organs and bat away the thing inside my computer. And then after that moment of panic passes, I realize it is just a gray alien mannequin that has been set up to launch at me from a ramshackle, like, catapult in the garage. So
It was like a little trap.
the aliens punked me.
That's so fun.
And then I could finally pause and save the game, and I haven't gone back since. But that moment was like, I had to register how bad that got me, and also that I was got by, like, a fucking Ashton Kutcher prank.
It could happen to you. Yeah, no, this looks fun. I downloaded it as you were talking about it. So.
Yeah. It's on itch.io. It's completely free. Like, the creator has, like, a tip jar. I would say right now it's pretty feature complete. I don't think there's, like, an end to the story mode implemented yet. And some of, like, as I haven't really, like, looked into it because I want to be surprised, but I understand some of, like, the little mysteries around the base. And the base area is huge. It's 26 different satellites, like, spread across this wooded area. A lot of the mysteries around there don't have, like, conclusions just yet. And I would say the only other thing, as far as, like, this being an alpha, is this is done in the source engine.
So it
Yeah,
has
you can
source
see
engine
it.
physics,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you can
it
see
has a lot of little tiny objects just strewn about, especially that's all the trash in your base are just small physics objects, and sometimes those can get a little source engine wacky and just create needless endless clattering sounds, and it can be a bit hard to determine, like, is that an actual thing I should be afraid of, or is that just the game wigging out, you know?
Yeah.
Trees will drop pine cones, and pine cones will land with the default source engine, like, collision sound. And if you can think of that, and if you're just, like, walking out in the woods to, like, a thing, and you hear that, you're gonna, like, immediately swivel around and be like, what the fuck was that? It's just a pine cone, right?
Yeah. This sounds fun. This looks like a good vibe game. I think that's why I'm interested in it. Aesir, I have a question. Last time we were here, Resident Evil 4 Remake hadn't released yet. We were reserved. I don't know your opinion on the Resident Evil 4 Remake. What'd you think of it?
So I think last time we talked, were we in agreement that we wanted it to really just don't try to be an action game, just really double down on being a horror version of Resident Evil 4?
You know, I can't really remember what my pre-release feelings were like.
And what we got was pretty much more of the same. But
yeah, it's like it went down the action game route. It's not as off the wall as the original. It's more sort of professionally presented. It's still goofy in ways.
I think it's a little more refined, but it loses a lot of that
arcadey
GameCube era like jank and crustiness to it.
Yeah, so this is my worst case scenario for the remake. I just straight up, I really like the remake. I think it's a really, really, like in that sort of realm of AAA linear story games like this or The Last of Us or what have you. This is what I love because there's so many interesting like enemy encounters and so many interesting scenarios that they have us go through. I love that stuff. Sure. I think we live in a really great time for video games in many ways because we have this, but then we also have like Voices of the Void, and it's like that's completely off the wall, made by somebody who's like seemingly not beholden to a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, I really like the Resident Evil 4 remake, but it is my I think it's the least interesting way of reimagining Resident Evil 4.
And Resident Evil 4 didn't even need a remake, right?
No.
Like, on its own, Remake is pretty good. I would recommend the game. But also, to me, it's not better than Resident Evil 4.
I feel like...
So, like, it's like,
I feel like the RE4 remake was kind of like a necessary evil, but not like evil, but a necessary step they had to do to move on to remaking games that might need it more, like Resident Evil 5, right?
Yeah.
Whichever direction they go with continuing, and I think they absolutely will continue, like, doing this redux of the original RE storyline. You kind of had to need to do RE4 in order to move on to RE5 or RE0 or original RE1, whichever direction they go with it.
Yeah, totally. And eventually they are going to have to get to Resident Evil 6.
Which
doesn't need it, because that's a perfect game.
They can delay... Oh my god.
All right.
Listen.
He does not speak for me, dear listener.
Pierce Nivens died for all of your sins.
Okay.
Does Sherry return in that game, or does he come back in...
Yeah. Sherry comes back in 6. Oh my god.
She hooks up with Wesker's son, Jake Mueller.
Wow.
Oh my god.
What storytelling. But Aesir, this says Resident Evil Remake Randomizer. So you've been playing like a mod of this game then, right?
Yeah. So I think that the original Resident Evil 4, it holds the distinction of it doesn't have the deepest combat system in the world. It has a really fun combat system, but what it has is probably the single greatest enemy lineup of any game ever developed. You have so many interesting ways of presenting threats. And it's also, you have to remember, it's in the context of people are really sort of getting around to that over-the-shoulder camera perspective. So enemies will have like a shield, and you can like blow pieces of the shield in different places. We don't have like your average sort of 3D shooter game today doesn't have anything even remotely that interesting. But then you have enemies that, like, you blow up their heads, and that's how you kill them. But then, a few hours into the game, you get enemies who are like, no, that's how you buff them up. You shoot them in the head. And there's just so many interesting enemies that if you play the original Resident Evil 4 and you throw a randomizer mod on top of it, it's really interesting just how much it still sort of works, because a lot of the core functions of the enemies are shared among the entire pool. So, like, they can climb stairs, or they can jump jump over fences or into windows. That's shared among the entire enemy pool. So if you swap out the enemies in an area, most of the time...
It doesn't break the game.
It doesn't break the game. And what happens, and I love playing randomizers when I'm doing design or like doing design documents. What you get is really, really off-the-wall bonkers experimentation. And every now and then you're like, oh my god, that is such a genius idea. And it came just from randomizing the enemy placements. And so I love that. But this is the Resident Evil 4 Remake randomizer. It's strong. It's a lot of fun. So the Resident Evil 4 original, it's also like you can do, no death runs, and it's still kind of interesting. Oh my god, I'm getting messages. So what you need to do for the Resident Evil 4 Remake randomizer is you need to sort of lock into a build really early on, because you don't really drop guns. The merchant, he's there, like, if you do, like, New Game Plus, he's right outside the first house, so you can just go to him, like, look at what he has, okay? Now you need to lock into this weapon, and just see how far you can go. Just see how far you can get with it. The problem I have with this randomizer is that Krauser, the alien predator thingy, and Mendes are there, also the Wolverine guy, and it's like, ooh.
Yeah, I've
These are
seen
a
the
bit too
clips.
much.
I've seen the clips of, like, the guy doing the cutscene where Leon's looking at the village and they're burning the drivers, and then he gets out of that and just Krauser's just charging him.
I'm surprised you can't, like, turn those off.
You definitely can. I don't know how strong the... I just go by, like, randomized seats or whatever. But there's probably some way of doing it. I just haven't gotten into that. But I don't think it's as interesting a randomizer as the original Resident Evil 4 is. But it's still a really good time, man.
Damn, that's sick.
Recommend if you want to get some extra juice out of your Resident Evil 4.
Damn. No, that's hype. I love Resident Evil mods. I have literally never played a randomizer ever. I've always been intimidated by those. But randomizing enemy placements to me is more interesting than, like, randomizing, like, item rewards, because item rewards feel very, like, inherent to the level. Like, Super Metroid doesn't make sense to me otherwise. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
It's like, okay, this
I don't know if I have a game I've played enough that I would, one, recognize what's changed in a randomizer, and two, be able to extrapolate from that, like, what the knock-on effect would be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, like, no, but you would definitely feel it in enemies in Resident Evil 4. Like, you would notice. I'm sure you would.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds like hype. I will totally check it out. That's awesome. Y'all, are you ready to go to the Variety Minute?
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah, Funk Soul Brother.
What? What'd you just call? I'm just kidding. This week's Variety Minute is PS2 era platformers. I thought we settled on Sony platformers. It's fine. I won't. Either way, we got iconic titles here. Sly, Jack, Ratchet. Aesir has done quite a few videos on these topics, specifically Ratchet. I think you would... I think it's fair to say Ratchet's probably your favorite of these,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh, yes. It's the one I played the most.
Yeah. I really recommend his one with the gaming design tips. Basically, he comes up with like, I don't even know the number now, but like he comes
That's
up with
30.
a lot of lessons learned. And I think 3D platformers and the platformer genre in general is really good for learning this stuff. He compares it to like building. I say he as if you're not here. You compare it to like building a house, either like building it around a central thing or not. And I think platformers are really good at that, especially this era. I think they learned a lot of shit here, especially Ratchet. I think the thing about Ratchet is I played Rift Apart like a few months ago. It's not that different than 1. Like they really got a lot right on 1, and then they just kept making the games.
I think that is the fundamental difference between Ratchet and Sly and Jack, is that Ratchet 1, that is like, it's so fully formed. The second game, it like makes Ratchet a bit friendlier of a character, and it like adds little quality of life changes and such. But it really is just it just follows the formula established by the first one. Whereas Sly 2 and Jack 2, I feel like both of those are sort of just, we have to re-roll the dice on a lot of things in order to change what we want this license to be going forwards. Jack, much more so than Sly, but Sly I think also did that.
They literally took like a fucking Banjo-Kazooie-esque platformer and turned it into a Grand Theft Auto. It's like, what?
I love that. But they kept the movement scheme. So it's did. I love that. I always feel like that sort of a it reinforces that, you know, Jack is a platformer mascot in a GTA game because he's like a man out of time.
Murph's not a big fan of Jack 2. I will say one of the other things I really like about Jack 2 is the fucking hoverboard. Literally, if you put a skateboard in a game, you can just have a normal game and you just put a skateboard on once in a while. I love it. 10 out of 10.
But it's so good. It's so fluid. It's so fun to move around with that thing.
Yeah. They give you different options to move. Like sometimes you want a zoomer, and sometimes you just want to like run around in your the way you do the fucking roll into the jump. You just want to move as Jack. Sometimes you want to use the hoverboard. They give you a lot of options in that. I definitely think the mission structure in Jack 2, sometimes it could be a little difficult and frustrating. But like, I love Jack 2 for that.
Did you? I imagine everybody listening to this and everybody here, the docks. You remember getting stuck on the docks, and then your little sister got to play your save file while you were vacationing away, and you came back and she had new gamed over your saved file, and then you didn't touch the game for another few years out of frustration.
I don't know how that's a universal experience, but yes.
That's an accurate representation of Jack 2 checkpoints. Like, you failed there and you had to restart the entire game.
Yeah. Yes, it's very realistic in that sense. No,
so
but
what do we feel... Like, I think we kind of tiptoed into what, like, platformers in the PS2 era switched up is that they became more mission-focused rather than level-focused, right?
Yes. I would also say they became more action-focused.
Yeah, for sure.
But
like,
that's also...
I mean, you can see with Ratchet 1 and Ratchet 2, like, the big changes in the quality of life is, like, a lot of the shooting, like, strafing. It's much less focused on the platforming. It's much more like, okay, you want more gunplay, right? Gunplay, you know?
Yes.
And sort of the big lesson for Jack going from 2 to 3 was honing in on the gunplay being better in order to make the combat more fun.
Yeah, and I don't know about you two. I think Jack 3 is leagues better than Jack 2.
Yes.
Like, I think Jack 2 is almost bad in comparison to how much better it is to play Jack 3.
Almost.
Right.
Some would say is.
I'm in hot water now. Murph doesn't like Jack 2. I like Jack 2, y'all. I don't know. I think I get frustrated in the desert, and I don't like the vehicle combat in Jack 3. I think that may be like the big thing.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I feel Jack 3. If you enjoy the car combat and such, I think Jack 2, if it has like the problem I have with Jack 2 is that a lot of the missions are really bad. It's just like, now you get into a power armor, and it's just like, he walks so slow, and it's like 5 minutes, and it's like, come on, man. It's like, it just feels like padding.
Yeah. I think it's like the level design and structure for a lot of platformers just gets a lot looser and more rather than in the PS1 era where you got like Crash and stuff. It was a tighter experience because a level had to begin and end. Now in the PS2 era, because we can do bigger levels and have wider range of movement for characters, they give you more avenues just to fuck around in, right?
Yeah.
It becomes more a playground.
I also think that the transition from 4:3 to 16:9 widescreen aspect ratio, I think that was one of the factors that sort of nuts developers into doing more combat. I think that when you have that sort of more rectangular frame, it's a lot... the frame itself more sort of focuses you in on the things that are in front of you. But the moment you add the space to the sides with widescreen, all of a sudden you need to incorporate the sides into gameplay, and the most intuitive way of doing that is just add enemies, because it's more about the flat plane around you than it is just the path ahead.
Yeah, give you more things for your eyes to swivel to.
Yeah, and I think that if you're designing a game and you're playtesting on widescreen, I think your brain would just naturally... it's not the only reason, but I think your brain would naturally go to like... How can I, like, this doesn't feel right. How do I make use of this space? And you just sort of get sort of nudged into adding enemies to make some use of that.
The periphery, I mean, like, you can look at shooters, like, with how Doom approaches it, too. Like, I think periphery, like, really matters in 3D space, as does jumping. Like, 3D space is hard, but once we hit the PS2 era, they figured that part out, and when we cite, like, Crash... I think Sly, we'll get to Sly 2, obviously, but Sly 1 is very Crash-like.
Oh, yes.
It is very there is a hub, but then there are these focus stages. And before playing this game for this time around, I thought Sly 1 was my favorite, and it still might be, ? I'm interrogating these feelings as we speak.
It is mine.
There's a focus, especially to how Sly moves, and there's a simplicity to it that I really enjoy. There's definitely frustrating bits. I think Sly 1 can be frustrating in a bad way, especially if you're hunting for all the clue bottles. But like otherwise, the departure was so ambitious, but it was also tailored. I think, I'll save it for the Sly 2 thing, but I think also they became more focused in terms of actual gameplay for the characters. They looked at the characters and say, what can these characters do? What do these mean? And it's like, okay, so there's a raccoon that steals stuff. So you build a game around that instead of like some vague power set, or Sonic the Hedgehog. Like he turns into a ball. That's pretty much all you got in 2D. Whereas in 3D, there's like actual things that the design can reflect. Did I make sense there?
Yeah, it became a lot very character driven. Whereas like in the PS2 and N64 era, you had genres that branched out, but generally if you got like, I don't know, a movie tie-in game, it was going to be some form of platformer. Like the one I always think of is Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein had a tie-in for the Sega CD. It's a platformer. But if they were to do
the one you thought of?
Because that's the most absurd one.
Okay, all right.
Batman Returns on the Amiga. No, Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah.
Did they get De Niro to re-record his lines?
And so, like you said, it becomes very, like, character-driven. Like, what can we do different for the genre? Like, there's a lot of games on the PS2 that sort of flirt with being a platformer, but I'm not sure I would define them as that. Like, the first God of War. Would you define that as a platformer? It has platformer segments.
A lot of them do that.
Yes, because like platforming was just the way we thought of, like, this is how games work. You do some platforming. So like, God of War, like if they were making God of War for the first time today, no, they would not have necessarily sections where you just jump over gorges and such. That was just like a feature of the era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's just how we navigate space, apparently.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a reason, and maybe the answer is something Naughty Dog moved on, but things like Crash didn't really have a life in the PS2 era? Is there something that gameplay was like antiquated, or they couldn't evolve it?
Okay,
I
so
do want to cite, I love Twinsanity. Did you do something with Twinsanity, Aesir?
I did, and this question is the premise of a 2.5-hour script I have open right in front of me right now. that goes over the history, the transition from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2 platformers, the sort of rise and fall of Crash Bandicoot, and the ascendancy and transformations of Ratchet, Sly, and Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we get a little teaser.
Okay, so I think what Crash was missing that the subsequent games had was that, you know, it is true that gamers were getting older and that they wanted more mature storytelling. Sly did not obviously have the components for that. Twinsanity, I think, sort of refocused it and showed you that, no, actually, like, the Sly Neo-Cortex dynamic, that can work. Like, that can sustain a game. I think one of the problems Crash Bandicoot had also was that it didn't have good combat. You know, you just sort of slide or spin. It has fine platforming, but it doesn't have great combat. So you would more so need to rely on interesting set pieces. And the best parts of Twinsanity are that. So it's like the stealth pieces, or when they sort of integrate the platforming into interesting sort of contexts, like when you're in the Ancient Battleship or the Academy of Evil.
Yeah.
But to actually make Crash Bandicoot work in the PlayStation 2 era, I think they really needed to figure out how to tell a story in the Crash universe. I think they needed to recalibrate the combat, and I think the sort of wacky physics puzzles that they started to add in Crash Twinsanity would have been an interesting route to go. They did sort of ditch it. I also think that... hold on, do you want me to maybe just go through the script real quick?
We love exclusive content.
Okay, so here's stuff Crash did correctly, like the camera automatically nudged you in the right direction because you just go forwards, just go into the what's ahead of you. Don't make the player fight the control scheme. Yeah, I think it's interesting that they didn't add the crouch kick thing. They didn't add that until Crash 2, right?
Yeah.
The slide move.
Yeah, it's like, oh, but that's such an obvious thing. Also, like Crash Bandicoot, the reason for the crates is because they couldn't have enough enemies in the levels, but they wanted you to have something to do. So they're just like, let the player break crates. And, oh my god, you could just get rid of all the enemies. Breaking crates is way more fun.
I think that's a huge thing, is in terms of like Sony versus Nintendo. Nintendo was really big on collectathons and like big worlds, and like that was definitely not a Sony focus. I think even with
Sony
Crash,
wanted to focus more on the set pieces because that was more cinematic, which even they were starting to lean towards.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I think it pays off now, and maybe not in comparison to like a Mario 64, but in comparison to a Donkey Kong 64, I think a lot of these hold up really well.
I think that like PS2 era platformers, as far as like that timeless question, I'm kind of like, no, I feel like Jack, Sly, Ratchet, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, I don't know, that kangaroo one, they feel all very of their time, even when I play them now. I don't really know you could bring them to the modern day the same way that, like, if Nintendo dropped a Donkey Kong 64, like, for the first time tomorrow, it would be very well received. I don't know the same would be true for, like, a Sly 1.
I personally would want this era, because like, especially when you look at like indie representation here of like influences, you don't see a lot of like PS2 era. You see ukulele and you see N64 stuff. Like that's where we're at right now in terms of influence. I think that PS2 had a lot there to go. And I think once PS3 started, where the platformer as a genre started dying out in popularity, we started to see less and less innovation there, and that's what sucks.
I have I'm sorry. I have the document open to what I think happened with Crash Bandicoot. The biggest problem Crash Bandicoot had was that it was owned by Universal, and Universal kept getting their fingers into the middle of development and screwing up the projects. Another problem they had is that like Sly Cooper, if you think of Sly Cooper as a sort of child of Crash Bandicoot. It's not like the same developers, but you talked about how the first game really is just Crash Bandicoot, but stealth.
Yeah.
If you look at Sly Cooper as an evolution of Crash Bandicoot, just as an evolution of that sort of archetypical PlayStation 1 mascot, you can point to it and said, but here's the ways in which it has evolved. Like, here's how it has grown. Crash, and you can look at, like, Jak and Daxter and, like, the Jak series, it grows. Ratchet, there's genuine growth for Ratchet since Spyro, and Crash didn't really get that. Crash got, like, you get the Crash 3 Warped, and, it's a fun time and everything, but it's, like, so many vehicle levels, so many, like, weird gimmick levels that just aren't that great, because the core movement scheme, like, the core concept of Crash, just doesn't have a lot of flexibility, which is why, like, when you get to Crash 4, 20 years later, you have so many, just, here's new masks that completely overhaul what the challenge is. Like, now you can reverse the levels, and you can, like, spin endlessly, and you can, like, phase objects in and out of existence, because the actual, like, core movement scheme, like, the core gameplay of Crash is so simplistic. And when you get to everybody's first outing on the PlayStation 2, Ratchet comes out really fully formed. Jak, that's just like, it's a more fantastical sort of mixture of Crash Bandicoot and maybe Zelda, but then it, like, grows and becomes gritty and whatever. But it's like, that's at least what the first game went for. And Sly is like Crash but stealth. But Crash Bandicoot's first outing on the PlayStation 2 is like, I believe it was The Wrath of Cortex. And
yes, it was, and that game sucked.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, there's a lot of interesting things in that game.
Yes.
I believe it added... Did that game add... No, the body slam was in previous games.
Yes.
A lot of those developments had sort of slowly happened, like we talked about with the crouch spin thing, with the body slam. It's just these little ways of navigating space a little better, because, like, I don't want to, like, just when I'm falling down, I'm not actually doing anything. So just let me body slam. That's fine. But Wrath of Cortex, it's just a lesser Crash Bandicoot, and it adds really nothing to the experience.
They did a lot of what you said, which is a lot of, like, and Crash did this a lot in, like, Warped as well. Like, you saw it going as, like, the missions would have completely different side, vehicles, or Wrath of Cortex had the ball. I don't know if you remember the hamster ball, but that was the game with that one. I 100% agree there. I think Jak is, in my opinion, my favorite out of these. Possibly because of nostalgia on my own. I think that was the one I resonated with the most. But it's also the one with the most tonal stuff. When Murph said, this belongs in its era, I don't necessarily think that of Ratchet. Like, I look at Ratchet, I'm like, you could make a Ratchet in 2075, and as long as it's the same bread and butter, is still pretty fucking good.
I think a big part of that is because Ratchet was the one that kept going. Like, Naughty Dog moved on to doing Uncharted, which we could say, in parts, it kind of is a platformer in sections, but it's a platformer not taking from Jak or Crash or Sly or Ratchet. It takes from Prince of Persia, which was another PS2 era platformer.
Oh, yeah.
True.
And it has, like, Resident Evil 4 combat, but it dials it down around, like, sort of Indiana Jones adventure feeling,
Yeah. I think that's real. Citing Prince of Persia just unlocked a section of platformer there. But Sands of Time was a banger too.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, the other thing is we see this new type of platformer, one that existed before, because Prince of Persia is technically like a remake of an existing game, but this more immersive platformer, where it's not about, like, jumping on floating platforms, it's about scaling, it's about planning movements, it's stuff we would see evolve more in, like, the original Assassin's Creed games,
or
things
Mirror's
like Uncharted.
Edge. I was gonna say.
Or Mirror's Edge, yeah. And sort of the mascot platformer starts to fall by the wayside in the PS3 era.
Yes,
and that also speaks
Ratchet.
to, like,
Ratchet just keeps
except
going.
for Ratchet. I don't even know why.
Because Ratchet was continually made by its original developer. Insomniac just liked making Ratchet games, and Ratchet did really well with the new hardware because it was a lot of visual effects that they could push the limits of the PS3 on.
Yeah. There's also, when you move from, like, Crash Bandicoot is very tailored around the limitations of the PlayStation 1. I think Andy Rubin owns the patent for chunking off levels the ways they did in Crash 1. And they had to like actually get into like this. I think they went into, it wasn't the sound memory. It was some hidden memory in the PlayStation 1 that they sort of had to hack into with the game in order to make some of the levels process. It's a really funny story where they have like an executive from Sony, and they're like telling him that they want to do this, and they're like, nope, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this. And then he like slides a piece of paper across the table that's like, here's the instructions on how to do this. Just don't tell them I told you how to do this. But you know, when the PlayStation 2 comes around, a lot of the Crash Bandicoot limitations are removed, but Crash doesn't really adapt. But because he has so much of the IP has like lingering PlayStation 1 design sensibilities baked in, Sly doesn't have that. Jack doesn't have that. Ratchet doesn't have that. So they get a much easier time just from the get-go. They can just get running, whereas Crash has to sort of stumble and reimagine itself and figure out what it wants to be. But by the time you go from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3, all they've really added is just like more horsepower. Presentation-wise, like the controller, it's the same controller. Like it looks different, and it has 6-axis movement. And that's like, they added 6-axis like puzzles to Ratchet, Tools of Destruction. And it's like, those sections all suck. Nobody uses them. They remap it to the original controls anyways. And 6-axis, like, that just died within the first year of the PlayStation 3. So, tech-wise, the only thing the PlayStation 3 really added was just, like you said, more visual spectacle, maybe more complicated enemy AI or something. But that already, like, that worked really well for Ratchet. There wasn't anything missing. Whereas if you had continued on with Jack, you know, would you have had to do Assassin's Creed or Infamous sort of scaling, like have him be able to ledge grab, and like would you have had to reconfigure what Jack is doing in the city, because like would it stay cartoony, would it get like more realistic? And it's just, and same with Sly Cooper. You know, they did do a Sly Cooper 4 Sensaru games.
Yeah, Senzaru did the Sly 4 Thieves in Time.
And I'm actually curious, just quickly, what do you guys think of that?
I was going to bring it up in the main topic.
Okay.
Based on impressions.
Is it important?
Well, I'm just saying because I think one of the reasons Ratchet was able to so seamlessly keep going is because the core concept, it is so fully formed. It's just fun combat, fun guns, fun planets, and you just run with that. Whereas Sly Cooper, it has like a story to tell about like family and like this dynasty, and the more you keep adding to it, the more it's just like, oh, here we go again. It's once again some jackass is trying to attack the Cooper legacy.
I was about to say, I think the real thing for Thieves in Time Sly 4, the issue is the game actually has to have good writing. Sly 1 didn't need to. I think by Sly 2, the way the worlds work and how the heists work requires and demands good writing. And I think Sly 2 might have the best writing out of any PS2 platformer, or any platformer possibly ever. Not necessarily because of its cast, because all these mascot platformers have good casts, but because of how the missions are sort of like function in different ways to like, oh, here's how the heist works. You're sort of learning the components, and it builds into a heist, and it's also coded in different ways. Like sometimes you're infiltrating a dinner party.
We're drifting into the main topic.
sorry. To go back to it. Sly needs good writing, and doing the Sly 4 thing, which is the Crash 4 thing of we're going into time and we're doing weird shit, it's cute, but that's not what Sly really needs for momentum and to innovate, you know?
That's
it was
a great
Sly
idea.
4 for the sake of having a Sly 4.
Yeah, whereas like doing weird time shenanigans, like, oh yeah, that makes sense for Crash Bandicoot, because Crash Bandicoot is just like, it's kind of like Mario in that sense, where it's like, this guy isn't attached to like a strict continuity or anything. You can just go wild, man. Do whatever.
No one gives a fuck. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, nobody's taking a Crash Bandicoot too seriously. You can just do whatever you want. That's cool.
Yeah, whereas Sly is like, okay, this was supposed to be grounded on some level.
Yeah.
You know?
I would say the same thing really applies to Jack. I do think there are more stories to tell about Jack, like the transition to Mar and like the creation of Haven City if he decides to go back in time even further and such. But with Ratchet, because it's such a silly universe, I feel like, I think they kind of they did make it less silly in the PlayStation 3 games, but I think it's still like it's so much easier to just imagine, oh, here's just another threat that Ratchet has to go up against than it would be for Sly Cooper.
Yep. And like I agree. Aesir, have you ever played the fucking PSP Jack game The Lost Frontier?
I played the first hour of that.
It's
on
not
an
good.
emulator.
Yeah,
it is
same.
atrocious.
It's dog shit. Yes,
it doesn't even have the
agree.
good movement.
No,
I'm having
it doesn't.
such serious deja vu. I swear the last time we had Aesir on, we talked about The Lost Frontier.
We might have. Either way, I guess what I'm trying to say is I agree. Jack, there's another sequel out there, but I guess that's the ultimate thing is like I would want a developer that wants to do it.
I would do it.
And I don't... There we go.
Give
it
Jack.
to Aesir. Yeah.
I'll do the best one. I actually, I would love to do a game. Okay, this is sort of a crazy idea, but maybe not as a Jack game. But I would love the idea of, kind of like how Jack is a spiritual sequel to Crash. What if you did like a spiritual sequel to Jack, where you're like the future version? It's kind of like the Terminator. Like you could do the Terminator with Jack, where like Jack goes back in time to defend baby Jack.
That's Jack 2.
So you're doing the
No. He goes back.
You're doing
in time.
Jack 2-3 gameplay in Jack 1 levels.
Yes.
I get what you're
reverse
saying.
it.
Yes.
You flip it from what they did with Jack 2. And you have like guns and you're just mowing down these like Banjo-Kazooie enemies.
What is Aesir?
It's kind of like
Be
Conquer.
a little, maybe. I don't know.
I wanted to ask another question here.
Hey, maybe they shouldn't give me the license.
Astrobot just came out like last week, right?
Oh, we had the same question I did.
How important is the mascot to this? Because in my head, I look at Astrobot and I'm like, this gameplay looks fucking fresh as fuck, but the look of the game kind of turns me off because it is literally just like it's PS5 hardware. That's the character. I'm
Yeah.
like, what?
I think Astrobot is a little flawed because it's about like, oh, going inside the console and the magic that's happening there within is really hard to do with the PlayStation 5 or even any model of PlayStation, maybe outside the first, right? Because it's like Nintendo could do a premise like that. If Nintendo is like, here's a game about exploring the Nintendo Switch inside, I'd be like, yeah, that runs on magic. Whereas, like, with Astrobot, it's like, save the GPU so you can get the teraflops and megapixels. It's like, this is much too clinical.
Yeah. Where's the magic at, is I guess the thing. I hear it's a really good game. I'm actually going to play it as soon as possible.
And I think it's relevant to our discussion because the big thing, like, the discourse around Astrobot is like, see, you can still do a PS2 era platformer and have it be one of the biggest games of the year, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And do we think, like, Sony will learn from this? Are we going to get our PlayStation All-Stars 2?
I think you're gonna get. I don't think that's the lesson Sony takes. I think the lesson Sony takes is like, Astrobot should be a live service game. This is really a game where you should be paying $5 a month, and you should be having skins, and then people
Season
can like
passes.
buy their. Yeah, season pass. You have to get the season pass, and you can get like the Ratchet ears, and you can put that on your Astropod, and maybe we can incorporate NFTs into this, and it can
I
just
could
be.
totally see the PS6 or whatever having a Mii equivalent, but you customize your own Astrobot.
I could see that. You know what I want? I think Team Astrobot up with Sackboy. That could be fun.
Yeah?
I agree. I like Sackboy. I like Little Big Planet. 100%. I think, are we ready to go to the game of the week?
I think we are. You were getting mightily close there.
I was flirting with it. I was.
Let's just tip over.
All right,
All right.
Murph, go ahead.
Right, I'm doing the intro.
Yeah.
Our game of the week is Sly 2 Band of Thieves. Released on this day in history in 2004 by Sucker Punch Productions.
Is that
Sly
true?
2 evolved... What was that?
Is that true?
We're 5 days off, but let's let them hope.
Continue.
I think I looked... Oh, today's the 14th, not the 19th. Well...
Oh. Continue.
Uh...
I was also blown back a bit. Like, oh my god, really?
The Sly 2 evolves from the first game, Sly Cooper, the thievius raccoonus, by moving beyond standard platformer levels, instead opting for a mission-based structure with 8 hub worlds and 3 playable characters. You have Sly, who is the thief and platformer, Bentley, who is the brains and gadgeteer, and Murray, the muscle and all-around daredevil. Together, the trio try to stop the Claw Gang, an international crime organization that has stolen pieces of clockwork, the ancient cyborg enemy of Sly Cooper's family. It's a tale of heists, betrayal, and for some reason, the Lumberjack games. Often regarded as the peak of the Sly trilogy and one of the best games of the PS2. With that all said, what did we all think of Sly 2?
I think it has the best of Sly Cooper. It has the best levels, but I don't love it. I think the first one's better.
I agree. I go back and forth. This may be one where if you put a gun to my head, Sly 2's better, maybe in theory on paper, but if you asked me, I like Sly 1 more.
Yeah,
I think it's tricky because Sly 1 to Sly 2 is kind of like, I don't know, Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2 or Arkham Asylum to Arkham City, where it feels like we diverged in a timeline, and therefore it's very hard to compare. I can compare Sly 2 and Sly 3, and spoilers, I think I go with Sly 3 as my favorite of the trilogy, but Sly 2 I think is like the objective best of the trilogy. But it's very hard to compare both of them to Sly 1, because Sly 1's just a completely different game. You can go on the same vibes, but you can't really go into the nitty-gritty mechanics. I think Sly 1 is the better mechanical game, because you can actually go, like, try-hard speedrunner mode with that, with the time trials and such, whereas Sly 2 and 3 are more about telling you a story and immersing you in this comic book heist narrative.
Yeah. It does have a lot of great gameplay. My favorite level in the entire Sly trilogy is the first of the Lumberjack levels, the man who tamed the Iron Horse, I believe it's called. Just like you have like roaming bears and stuff that just attack the enemies, and you can lure them into that. More of that, please. More of that sort of emergent gameplay in my Sly Coopers.
Mm-hmm. And also, that's a level. It has the 3 trains running around, and Carmelita's loose. It's the only level that you can like interact with her on, and something they brought into Sly 3 is that just eventually Carmelita would start roaming the levels on her own. I think this game has a really strong sense of style and narrative to it. Like Bro was saying, this is like some of the best writing and characterization. And it's not like the game is particularly deep. There's no one line where I'm like, oh my god, this just changed how I look at the world. But it's so consistent and feels like it could only be written this way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like a good way of design. Like when you look at games, a lot of times it's like expression or design. And it's like you make something based on a thieving raccoon. The first game did that in the way a typical 3D platformer would at like by that point in influence. But by this time they're like, no, it should be a living, breathing environment, and you should do missions to build to a heist. That is how that works.
It's the Sly games are so about showing you how theming is so important to a platformer, because you could do Sly 1 and probably redux those levels to like nix the thieving framing, but because you have that, it just gives so much texture to what you're doing. You're not jumping on precise platforms. You're deftly avoiding spotlights and lasers, right? That will trip the guards to where you are.
Absolutely.
And 2 also does a lot of things with like pickpocketing. Pickpocketing wasn't in 1. With like the currencies, whereas like the currencies in 1 is a very typical old platformer thing of like you get another hit, whereas this one has HP and the coins are meant to add to abilities, and that really works for me. Like that is a much better development.
Yes.
Save for the fact they kind of run out of useful abilities to buy by maybe like the mid game.
I think this game's too long.
I could it starts to tail off. The ending like sections aren't as impactful as I remember them from my childhood. Like I loved the second to last level. I liked the lumberjack games because I liked that as a concept. Like, oh, it's not a heist. You have to rig a competition. But now I'm just sort of I'm seeing the shortcomings with it, and that level itself, the hub, is sort of built around this like canyon pit that Bentley and Murray have to always go through to get to like the upper levels. Whereas I think it would have been stronger had Jean Bisson just had the one level with the trains, and then maybe you transition straight to the final episode, or maybe you get 2 episodes with Arpeggio as like the actual antagonist before he's subverted with Neela being the ultimate antagonist.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to cite real quick, in terms of structure and progression, I found it fascinating. Like, if you look at Sly 1, it's like each world, one villain, that's it. Boom. And then once the area's done, it's over. Whereas in this one, they sort of subvert what happens, especially like in the early mid-game where Sly and Murray get imprisoned and you're Bentley.
And the greatest twist of my childhood.
And like... It definitely shows a shortcoming of the game, which we will talk about. But it is interesting that these structures of progression are different. Like, it changes. You're like, what's going to happen next?
And they had the good sense to have Sly freed in, like, mission 3 of that chapter.
Yes.
Or
else it would have been shit.
It would have been a disaster. How are we liking because they really tuned up the characterization. They just took what was in the original game and they were like, okay, Sly needs to be more sort of, he needs to be cooler, he needs to be more masculine, he needs to be like much more of a bro. We just make him cooler. Okay. Murray, we need to revamp this guy. We cannot have him be like a giant crybaby. He needs to be the muscle.
Yeah.
How are we liking the new characters?
I think it was 100% necessary to move it. Not even just like if they hadn't done you're playing as a band of thieves, right? Sly 3 Band of Thieves. But if it was just still you only play as Sly and Bentley and Murray are helping him out, those reduxes in the character were really needed. And I think, having that mid-act where Sly and Murray are captured and then you just play as Bentley, that's great for the narrative tension. It builds to a sort of climax, and unfortunately, I think the game kind of peaks there, and then it's sort of falling action with the final 2 Claw Gang members. But I think that was such a great, memorable twist. Like, it's burned into my mind. The thing that really surprised me on this playthrough is I never realized that, like, outside of the first and last villains, everyone else gets 2 levels. And I remember thinking, like, oh no, that's, like, special that, like, Rajan has 2 areas, and Jean Bichon has 2 areas, and the Contessa also has 2 areas. Hold on, they all get 2 areas. I think the antagonists here are much more interesting and connected compared to the Thievius 5 or the Fearsome 5?
Fiendish 5. I disagree slightly. Well, specifically, I think, and Sly 3, I think, knows this personally, is I think, like, Mugshot is a very, like, powerful design. I think that's a really good one. Yeah. As is Panda King. I almost said Poe. The Panda King is also really good. I think Sly 3 knows that, and they brought him back. I think the Sly 2 villains are hit or miss, depending. I like Dimitri. I think Dimitri's really fun.
I think the villains in Sly 2 feel more like criminal threats, whereas in Sly 1, they're physical threats.
Yeah. they're also just, I think they're more layered in Sly 2. They feel like they have more inner lives, whereas in Sly 1, a lot of the times they just felt like really, really sort of cool designs. Like, what was the frog's name? Sir Rayleigh? Yeah. You're like, this guy, he looks cool, but I don't know. I don't think there's much going on there. Whereas somebody like the Contessa, you're like, oh, she's like evil. She's like really a bad person.
Yeah. And
well,
it helps
that
like,
you stalk them. Like, it helps that you see their patrols or you hear them talk. And, like, you are exposed to them a good bit throughout the world before you actually confront them.
Yeah, because you can bug their offices. And something I completely forgot is if you just sit in the hideout when you're, like, selecting a character, you can actually listen in to the villains, like, talking to themselves. Like, you can listen to, like, Rajan get stressed out and he takes a hit of spice, quote unquote, or like Jean Bisson, when you bug his office, he'll go on like, you know, that Rajan can throw a good party. Pretty surprising as a man from the Orient. It's like, whoa.
I mean, like, he's a man from the 1800s. He literally is from a different time.
They're like, hey man, you can't say that anymore.
Guys,
but it just adds to the feeling of you are doing a heist. Every piece like connects and builds towards this climax. And I think when I say like Sly 2 is objectively better than 3, it's because 3 isn't so good about making every mission feel integral to the final heist.
I agree.
Yes.
Guys,
I think
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Sly 3 has probably my favorite antagonist. I think it's a really interesting sort of your sort of way of bringing the past into conflict with the present and whatever. But yeah, I think Sly 2 probably has the best writing just overall. I really love how they even managed to incorporate Carmelita. Name flew out of my head. Like the fact that she's betrayed and like she's sort of with our gang, but she's not really with our gang. It's like, oh, they figured out an interesting way of incorporating her into the story.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Guys, I'm going to complain now. It is time for the complaints. Breaking them out. You asked earlier, how did we feel about the side character redesigns of Bentley and Murray? I like them, obviously, in a narrative standpoint. Mechanically, I think Bentley is good in singular missions. I think I like how he plays, but he is not meant for an open world or hub.
No.
Yeah.
And Murray is an example of like Murph has said before, and it's a GDC talk about like Thief, of like stealth games should have bad combat because it encourages you to be stealthy. But this game forces combat as Sly sometimes, and also Murray's combat is the best kind of combat, but it's not very involved, it's not very technical, and it kind of reminds you that combat in general is bad in this game.
I think it's a thing of counting this time, Murray has so few missions compared to Sly and Bentley, and oftentimes they kind of like run out of missions for him that are just like, oh, beat up these guys in this area, and it becomes like, Murray, carry this heavy shit to this location, right? And I think they should have done more to lean into the fact that he's also like the driver and mechanic of the gang. You only really get like one mission where it's like, oh, Murray, you drive the tanks to destroy like the Contessa's forces, or Murray, gun this turret, except for the segments where Bentley and Sly man turrets, right?
Yeah.
And then Murray has de-emphasized brawling the same way Sly has de-emphasized stealth, where it's more framing than anything. It's meant to be cathartic to play as Murray, where you just two-shot every enemy. But it doesn't lend itself to that hub world.
No, because the hub world, in terms of movement, is so important in a platformer. It's more important than anything. Sly has the movement. He's got the ways to like crawl around or like do things, and the hub is built for Sly. It's not built for Bentley and Murray. And I'm not necessarily saying they have to do fucking 50 flips and shit, but it's stale. Is what it is.
It's the Sonic Adventure 2 problem, where you have the Chow Garden, and you upgrade your chows by replaying old levels. What are the levels you're going to replay? You're going to play the Sonic and Shadow levels because those ones are fun, right? So it's the same thing where if you're fucking around in the hub, who are you going to fuck around with? The character that can move around the hub easiest. So you spend most of your time playing as Sly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They actually, in Sly 3, they had those brawler sections where you jump between characters. I love that. I think that's a great way of
I think a lot
them.
of the issues with playing as Bentley and Murray were fixed in Sly 3 because Bentley gets a quadruple jump like very early on, and he's more mobile than before. So it's fun to explore the level as Bentley. And Murray, he gets the ball form, which is a hell of a lot of fun to traverse a level with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like Sly 2 a lot. The other complaint I have, and this is a very minor complaint, I don't like Constable Neela or Carmelita Fox. I think they are the same voice actor. I don't like their voice actors.
Well,
like the characters are good.
Carmelita gets a different
Punch.
voice actor in every Sly game, and once you notice that, you can never unnotice that.
Yeah.
It feels very wooden. I don't know. Like, I just hate how they talk. I'm like, please stop.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the best Carmelita Fox? From which game, the voice actress?
One, because I kind of like a feisty mamacita.
Oh, yeah.
I think, yeah, one's pretty, I kind of like 3, and that's not my 3 favoritism. I think it's just they remembered, like, oh, she's supposed to be, like, Hispanic or something, you know? Whereas this, yeah, she comes across very wooden, even though I kind of like her arc, and how the game ends. Like, I don't want to talk about, like, the ending just yet, but I do like her juxtaposed with Neela, even though Neela becomes less interesting as the game goes on.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. I think location-wise, I feel like these are great locations. I think one didn't really utilize... Like, they had theming, but here it's like Paris, Prague, you know, fucking... The locations really breathe in terms of theming.
And the levels, the hubs are much smaller than I remember, but that's because they feel they're dense. They're all built around these, like, different eye-catch points. It's like a theme park. It's like, in the first area, it's all built around the giant peacock sign. And then in, like, the second Prague level, it's all built around this giant castle, but also you have the sewer systems and the section that Neela's controlling with her tanks. You know, it's all... It's just a fun little playground, and I think it feels very... Like, you could drop original Jak and Daxter into these levels, and it wouldn't feel out of place.
I like in the Prague thing with the Neela, Constable, and Contessa thing, where you're, like, pitting the two factions against each other. That's such a fun setup. These are great setups.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. I mean, like, in terms of missions, I do think some of the missions are fine. I will say it's an easy game. I think this is possibly the easiest of the PS2 platformers.
Sly has never had difficult platforming outside of that first one. Because jump and hit the circle button does 90% of the work you need to do.
Also, right? I need Bentley to not tell me to jump and hit the circle button on Mission 5. Or, like, on World 5. Like, I get it. I know. Mm-hmm. I'm aware.
I also need them to add skippable cutscenes in these games.
The Binocucom segments, especially if you're replaying missions, get very tiresome.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Sly! You gotta press the circle button!
Sly!
I hear you, turtle.
I am the Murray! Okay, guys.
The Murray!
Is that our gang? We're 2 Bentleys and a Murray? None of us are cool enough to be Sly?
No, I think we need to we need to get Matthew Matosis in here.
Yeah, he's the Sly. What other thoughts do we have on this game? I like the variety of the missions. Even the game, like, we talked a little bit about mini games here, but I think the mini games in here are fun. They're good.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a few too many turret segments. I actually would have liked more Bentley RC chopper missions, but they fixed that in Sly 3. So, like I said, I think it peaks early on. I think the Rajan and Contessa levels are just great. And then Jean Bisson is like half a good concept. And then the final area, the blimp, it's a really threatening and interesting location, but they just don't have interesting missions for it. It's just, we need to sabotage these 4 engines, but each engine works completely differently, so you need to do team-up missions, sort of.
But by the time of that world, I'm kind of done with the game.
Yeah.
It's also a lot of, like, you have to traverse this path again and again. It's like, oh, come on, man. This is a bit tiresome.
Yeah.
Sly 2 had a really cool train level in one of the Jean Bizon levels. And Ratchet 2 also had a really cool sort of snow train level. And yet, Jak 2 did not. But then Uncharted 2 has a train level that everybody loves.
That's also in the snow.
That's also in the snow. Oh my god.
It all comes back around. There's a demo of Ratchet in Sly 2, and there's also a Sly 2 demo in Ratchet.
Oh.
I love the secret stuff in Sly 2, like how you can get the making of video, interviewing all the voice actors. That's cool. Like, as a young Murph, like, the idea of, like, you know, learning, these are the people who make games. They're not just, like, sprung fully formed from the ground. They have to be crafted. Like, I think that's very important.
The best of that's the Insomniac Museum from Ratchet and Clank. But continue.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
But I think that shit's important to put in a game. Yeah, put in making ofs. Give us, like, equivalent of DVD special features that we can unlock by playing.
I agree. I 100% agree.
Totally.
All right. What did y'all think of the surprising and shocking Constable Neela twist? Not the one at the start of the game, but I'm talking like arpeggio knocks him down.
Where?
It's like, I am Clock Law.
She becomes like a Ben 10 fusion and shouts out her name. Like,
Yes.
I am Clockla. That's like, when I was a kid, I remember that being very shocking. As an adult, I noticed like, we only get like 2 seconds with arpeggio, and he's just there to explain what the plan is overall. And then it's just over, right? I think it really did need that buffer of like doing more with the blimp setting to bring it to conclusion, and also the fact that the final boss just doesn't have the oomph-da it did in the final Clockwork fight in Sly 1. Like, when you're traversing Clockwork's remains across the magma and stuff like that, that's like 100 times more thrilling than another turret segment.
Yeah.
You know? And Bentley and Murray do nothing except get captured.
I will say,
also,
I do... Go ahead, Aesir.
Sly 2, I just feel like it has a really weak sort of... Even though the characters, like the villains, are really well written, I think like the main antagonist, like the arpeggio, but then Neela, it's just like, this is such a weak, like, what is this character even? Whereas like in the first game, you had like this insane monstrosity machine bird that's just like kept alive by hatred. It's just conceptually so wild. And in the third game, you have Dr. Monkey or Dr. M, and he has like an actual beef with Sly's dad. He was like the Bentley of Sly's dad's gang. But then in like Sly 2, it's like, no, now I'm the main villain. Clock-Law.
It's like a bad villain wants to be the good villain from the first game. I mean, it's just lame to have like a lame villain. The final boss is just the lame villain pretending to be Clockwork.
Yeah. And all of the other villains in the game have stronger writing than your main villain. It's like, ooh, I don't know about that.
The idea of Sly's overall antagonist being a dirty cop, that works. Like, on paper, the issue is that over time, Neela loses that. Okay. It's just over time, Neela loses that and just becomes a mustache-twirling villain. When she shows up on the train level on her little glider, she, like, might as well say, mwahaha, right?
It's cartoonish, and it doesn't work. Yeah.
I think, and, like, I like the villain's plan, where it's like, where all the pieces fall together, where it's like, Dimitri distributed spice, quotation marks, to his nightclubs, and then we're going to use the Northern Lights to trigger them all to get, like, angry. It's basically the villain's plan from Kingsman. And then use that to power Clockwork's hate chip. but the fact it needs to like be spelled out over multiple paragraphs of dialogue with a character who's then immediately killed off, kind of shows. I feel like the ending was very rushed.
It's clumsy.
Yeah.
I will say I like what happens to Bentley. I feel like that's a good consequence, and I feel like it's it grounds the thing and gives it more weight.
Yeah, the fact that it does have like that sense of consequence of Bentley's paralyzed. And as a kid, I didn't even realize that was like permanent until Sly 3. I was like, why is Bentley in the wheelchair? Oh, right. He had like a 5-ton bird beak clamp on his midsection. And, you know, and then when like Bentley and Murray walk off and they leave their gear behind and Sly's like, you know, that's the end of it. Like, they did all this for my family legacy, and now they're going on to be their own people. That's just such a weird moment for a game that is marketed towards children to end on. Like, I remember it being like, oh, when Sly and Carmelita are in the helicopter, the reveal is Bentley and Murray hijacked it, and they're there in the cockpit. But it's like, no, they just, like, rigged up a little thing so it would fly in circles. They don't reappear.
But I do have to run in a few seconds to deliver a key. Something that's really cool about Sly 3 is that they kind of reuse the concept of, like, I like the idea of Nayla, like, this is a character that reappears. In Sly 3, they went so far as, like, we have a cold open with Dr. M.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're, like, building to this villain throughout the whole thing. And they, like, stuck to it. Whereas in Sly 2, the sort of bait and switch at the end, I don't think it just landed really well. But the consequences, that's really interesting stuff.
I agree. I mean, in general, I think Sly is the weakest of the 3 franchises. But there's definitely something special to it, even among, like, all of its peers. So, so this game does totally stand out to me.
Like, if we're talking, like, the trilogies of the PS2, Sly, Ratchet, Jack, technically Ty the Tasmanian Tiger had 3. I'll just read. If we're talking of the 3 definitive trilogies of the PS2, Sly, Ratchet, Jack, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger also had a trilogy, but we don't talk about him. Is that, for me, I find Sly is the best, like, solid one. It is consistent across, where, like, any given time, I may come up with an argument of, like, you know, Sly 1 is better than the other 2, or Sly 2 is better than the other 2. Whereas, like, with Ratchet is the one I like. I think it has more consistent highs, but it also has really crushing difficulty spikes. And then Jack is disqualified because it has Jack 2, so it doesn't even make it to the podium.
Jack 2's so good. This is so wrong. Oh no. Nah, this is fun. Okay, alright, whatever. There will be a Jack 2 episode one day, Murph. I promise you.
So you have played Sly 4, right?
Yes.
So I think, like, for you, someone that likes Sly 1, I think a lot of the platforming focus can be found in Sly 4, but it kind of came at the cost for the stuff that Sly 2 and 3 added to the franchise.
That is 100% accurate to say. I think that is, like, in a gameplay sense, yes. But what makes Sly special once we get to 2 and 3 is the storytelling and the theming. And, like, it goes to the writing. It's so weird to think, but, like, once we started, it's like, yeah, it's the writing. Whereas, like, in Sly 1 and Sly 4, it goes back to, like, how we make platformers, you know, like how everyone else does it. It's like, eh.
And I think Sly 4 is just a very flawed creation. It's very overproduced feeling. Mm-hmm. Like, it's hinged on the premise of Sly is back. But it's like, what does it really mean for Sly to be back? Does Sly want to be back? Could we have just done, I don't know, Bentley is back? You know, or something like that. And I'm just not really sure, like, do you want them to do a Sly 5?
Honestly, it depends on who makes it. I just want the person who makes it, or the developer or team who makes it, to want to make it. I think that's the answer.
Mm-hmm. I know the voice actor for Sly, he's really active in the speedrunning community, out of all places.
He also has, like, a podcast, I think. Or he had one. I remember back in the day.
he's super cool and like really loves this character.
Oh, there was a fucking movie. Y'all remember the movie trailer or like?
Yeah, I was trying to find
Yeah.
a way to like put that in. Remember when that came out in 2017?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
We're never trusting Dimitri again.
Yeah, that's... Oh, man, and that Marie redesign. Oh.
I guess that's the other thing is this is like 2 and 3 are the last time they look good. I think the actual problem with Sly 4 is they don't look good. They look ugly.
No. And like they went for a very like... I'm going to defend one of the jankest parts of Sly 2, which is the actual in-engine cutscenes. It's
Yes.
a lot of recycling like animations and such. Like there's a whole YouTube video that compiles like here's this animation used 27 times across different cutscenes.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
I like that because that actually leans into the comic book framing where it's just going from pose to pose, right?
Yeah.
And giving Sly these very fluid, fully animated, bespoke cutscenes. Like, I can see how you would want that, but it really, it comes at the cost of the flavor of Sly.
Yeah.
I
would, for a Sly 5, like, I would like a Sly 5, but something that really bugs me is how they don't seem to be able to make sequels without having, like, the world be at stake. I'd play a Sly 5 that's just, like, the gang doing heists. Like, I love that sequence in Sly 3 where they're doing the dog show, where they're with the Red Baron. Or, no, the Black Baron.
Yeah.
And you're just like, you infiltrate the Icelandic team and you sabotage them. My people. You sabotage them. I was like, I think that's good enough. I don't think you need, like...
You think Sly needs to fuck with Iceland more?
I think
just
Sly...
lower stakes.
As a sequel premise. Sly 5,
Yeah.
Sly Cooper versus Iceland.
Sly Cooper goes into the Blue Lagoon, pisses in the water.
Sly, crouch and hit the circle button to piss.
Literally. No, but
Sly,
I
we
agree
need
with the low stakes. Go ahead.
We need to throw a bomb into the volcano in order to destroy, to make it erupt and destroy the town, so we can infiltrate the bank. Bentley, are you insane? Bentley is revealed to be a villain halfway through in my version.
I think if there's a Sly 5, he should be a villain. I agree. Bring it all around.
They did that in Sly 4 with Penelope, and it sucked.
Oh, that's right, they did. And it was like, Bentley was heartbroken, but it was like, man, she wasn't that cool of a character. Get over her, man.
I think that's one of my problems with Sly 3 is I think the extra cast, like the koala shaman, I'm just not vibing on any of it.
It's way too big. It's like just they blew, like, I think already having 3 people in a game that really only has one character that plays really good, that's kind of pushing it. But then they just like blow up the cast size.
Don't make 50 mid characters. Make like 2 good ones.
Yeah, or like I like them assembling this gigantic team, but like you don't have to make me play as every member.
Yeah.
Automate that, man.
100%. Are we wrapping up?
I think we are. It's like, I mean, if there's a final thought, I think it is just kind of like a game that's tricky to talk about, really, because it's like, I don't know what I would add or really subtract from it that would definitively improve it in any way. It would all just kind of be guesswork and trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Well,
thank you
right.
for joining us. What?
Huh?
Every time I regret never recording on cam because I keep interrupting everybody. Aesir.
Yeah.
Aesir, you have a channel on YouTube. Where can we find you?
I have a channel on YouTube.
And
You
can find you.
That's it?
You can find me on Twitter or X, Aesir Aesthetics. I'm also on YouTube, Aesir Aesthetics. In the coming weeks, months, you'll be getting the reoccurring themes of From Software. I also have like a video about the crates of Crash Bandicoot and Ratchet that I finished that video like 2 or 3 months ago, and I've just still yet to release it. So that might even just be up this Monday. So if you guys plan on releasing this on the 19th, probably you'll already be able to watch that one.
Amazing. Yes. And subscribe to his Patreon. He does good stuff.
Give me money.
We have the Daydreamcast YouTube channel. That's what it's called. We throw up little extra supplemental videos as well. You can get your podcasts in video form there, but we also do things like compiling variety minutes into just like a whole 5-hour audio file. Or we speculate on the possible roster of a Marvel vs. Capcom 4, which is now our most popular video we have ever made. By a lot.
It's fucking crazy. We should get into fighting games.
If it breaks 1,000 views, we will pivot fully to roster speculations for fighting games.
Can you link me the video? I want to share it.
There you go. There we go. I will.
Do you have any, like, I know that we're trying to wind things down here. Do you have any oddball takes for the roster?
No Peter Parker. We cut out Peter Parker.
Yes, that was the big one. Yeah.
Which is a bit like saying we're not doing vanilla, we're doing French vanilla.
We're having Miles and Gwen instead of Peter.
We're having Ben O'Reilly.
Howard the Duck was the one that we're like, we want Goofy. Howard the Duck was like, yes, please.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you need to hear my voice in audio podcast form, you can also listen to my other podcast. This podcast is a bad idea, where I look, me and my co-host Fru, we look at more like internet history and things like creepypastas or ongoing trends. We just did an episode talking about the overwhelming Onceler fandom, and then we're going to be doing a special episode later this month where Fru is going to tell me about book talk or whatever that is.
Wasn't the problem with the Onceler that they couldn't ship him with anybody except the Lorax? So they just created...
Spoilers. Don't talk about Oncest just yet. Listen to the podcast when I finish editing it.
Oh my goodness.
Look, there's a lot of crook pornography of the Onceler.
That's what Aesir does in his spare time, is look up Onceler.
It helps write the Silent Hill 4 commentary, all right?
I'm sure.
Sure.
Thank you so much for joining us, man. It's always good to have you, man.
It's always nice to be here. My favorite part is that I don't have to edit anything.
I know.
I do so much editing. It's so nice not to have to edit something.
Yeah, you just show up. You just show up and look good. You're the star. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really nice. And it's great to be here. You guys, I always have fun when I'm recording